There's so much in the news about Black women disparity in the medical industry of how Black women are dying through birth, childbirth, just simple as childbirth. So I'm sitting here today with Dr. Erica Baiden here, who is a behavioral health doctor. And we're going to talk today about some things she's seen and just some shared experiences she's had with other doctors in the country.
Thank you for having me, Miss Tanisha.
Thank you for being here.
Such an honor to be
I'm
here.
so excited to talk to you today. I have called on you in emergency. I have a thyroid issue, and I never forget when I found out about 20 years ago about having a thyroid issue, and I went to a woman of color. She was Filipino, and she took me through all of the information with thyroid, and she told me, she said, listen, I don't know if you're going to be my patient for life, but if you ever go to another doctor, do not allow them to operate on you, give you all of these different things. Like, she prepared me for if I was to go see people who weren't, didn't understand me, my experiences, my body, who I am as a Black woman. So you as a doctor, here, being in a space like this, how do you do you do something like that with your patients? Like, do you explain to them? Because a lot of doctors don't do that.
You're right. A lot of healthcare and healthcare safety and advocacy starts with establishing a rapport. And, one of your previous guests said the importance of a shared experience can go so far in somebody's outcome. And I think acknowledging somebody's fear about a condition and maybe why he or she may not navigate the medical system because that system was not meant for.
Right.
And expressing that and being as thorough and giving them the time that they deserve. And so I think that's the way I try to practice just in general. And I think you had probably a primary care physician, and I'm going to just shout out primary care physicians because they're the ones on the front lines with all of these concerns. And so if you haven't already, I would advocate for you to make, not you personally, but you women listening, to have a primary care physician, one that you trust, one that you can go to, one that will advocate for you at all costs.
And listen.
And listen.
Right. And you grew up in Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
And what brought you here to the States?
My dad received a scholarship to go to Utah State University, of all places. Could you imagine coming from Ghana, West Africa, to Logan, Utah? Have you ever been to Logan, Utah?
No, I have not, but I'm here in Utah.
You're here in Utah. So Logan is even less diverse.
Wow.
More rural than Salt Lake City. So you can only imagine back in the 80s what that was like.
Wow.
And then my parents divorced. And so when I was younger, we moved from Logan, Utah to the Northeast. So Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York. And then as I was looking for colleges, my dad was like, why don't you come back and check out Utah? And I thought he was just crazy. But here I've been 20 years later.
Wow. The health disparities in Black communities here in Utah, what's prevalent here in this state? Because, in Jersey, we have things. In Atlanta, there are things. What's here in Utah that you found and that you're trying to target to be that advocate for?
That's a great question. In Utah, Black people are about less than 2% of the total population. And even though we're less than 2% of the population in Utah, we still see similar healthcare disparities as the other Black people in the nation.
Right.
So that includes infant mortality, that includes maternal mortality, that includes cardiovascular disease like heart attack, stroke, diabetes. We're still seeing those same outcomes. When we look geographically at where most Black people are located here in the state, they are living in places with food deserts. And if there's a food desert, there's not access to quality foods, which then will affect healthcare outcomes in like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So we're seeing the same things.
Even though the population is smaller. So what do you think with with it being the same, even though the population is smaller, what do you think the issue is?
Representation.
Hmm. Yeah.
We have a concern here in Utah with representation and retention.
Hmm.
So I know it was shocking to you to know that I've been here for
Right.
20 years. And in that 20 years, you know, I have not seen a lot of other Black physicians. Fortunately, now we are trying to group together in retention efforts,
Right.
and then also with community advocacy and education.
Mm.
So we're slowly trying to reach out and encourage our population, our community, to even just seek us out just as a second opinion
Right.
or as a preparatory process before going into an appointment with another provider. We're also trying to engage people and other providers to become allies.
Right. Right. So you believe that representation is a part of the reason of the disparity.
Representation is a big factor in what may improve these healthcare disparities. There have been two studies that are important to note. When a woman is your provider, your healthcare outcomes are better. And number two, when we look at having a Black provider with a Black patient, the same is true.
Mm.
And so again, it goes back to those shared experiences, maybe those unique experiences that somebody wouldn't tend to look for or
Right.
ask
Right.
or just offer.
Okay. And what advice would you give to a patient going to see a doctor who does not look like them, right? And they are trying to tell them the symptoms and all of these things that's going on with them, but they don't feel as though their voice is being heard. Like what kind of advice would you give to them besides come see me?
Mhm. um, you as an individual know your body
Mm.
and trust that.
Right.
It's been with you for your whole life. So ask the questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. That's part of it. I think in our culture, there's been a thought of respect. And so if this person's sitting here with this degree or this profession, I have to respect their opinion. And yes, there's a respect, but it's a mutual respect. It's bi-directional. And so you should also be heard. So don't be afraid to ask questions. And then again, trust your gut.
Now, what made you move over into behavioral health?
Ah, very good question. Lots of different reasons, but I think the driving force is when I was in my practice, so much of what people were coming in for had an underlying behavioral health component.
Mm.
And I think as a society and as a Black community, we need to bring that into the forefront. We need to alleviate the stigma surrounding behavioral health because we all have our stuff. And if somebody says they don't, then that's the person you need to look at most, you
Right.
know? And it affects our physical health as well. So you can't have physical health without addressing behavioral health.
Hmm. And how do we address it?
Acknowledge it. It
Mm.
exists.
Yes, yes, yes.
We can talk about it openly and freely instead of maybe what we were taught to, oh, we don't talk about that. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a white person thing. We don't handle
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. It was back in the day, what goes on in this house stays in this house. And that right there uh brought in the dysfunction of keeping that type of behavior, behind closed doors where I can't seek help
Shame.
or shame. So how do we break that barrier, you believe? How do we do that?
These conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And then the community that we keep and the people that we talk with, establishing those safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more that it's out there, like Charlemagne the God has talked so much about
Yes,
his
yes,
struggles. Kendrick
yes.
Lamar's most recent album, he talked about himself going to therapy. I think the more that we are able to normalize this part of our health, the better that it'll be. And I'm just going to plug Black Physicians of Utah for one thing. We were able to get a grant from the NBA Players Foundation to support a Black men's mental health forum here in the state. So we're going to try to provide access.
I love that. I love that because Black men in health, look, that's a whole nother,
A whole
we need
nother
a new segment for that one. Good gosh. Because that is, we think about the health and protection of Black women. That's a whole different section than Black men, you know? And wow, wow. Yeah.
Call me back for that one.
I was about to say, I have to get you back and have like Jay Barnett come. He's a big mental health advocate and like some great mental health people. We're gonna stick on that. So thank you so much, Dr. Baden, for coming and speaking to me about health and disparity and what we can do. And I see that the biggest thing is to open up through communication. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with me today.
Thank you so much.
Oh, that was so good.